As promised on the Comcast Business Hotline right now, we are going to continue the LeBron James talk. He is Rick Morris from the FDH Lounge, has a national radio show based in Cleveland. He's on the Comcast Business Hotline as we speak. Hello, Rick. How are you tonight, my friend?
I'm doing great, Joe. Always a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Hey, man, great to have you, my friend, and I appreciate your time, especially on a busy Saturday night. And I know you're always busy. I want to talk to you a little bit about what you saw last night. I mean, I know the Cavs were coming off that game against Washington the night before, and the Sixers were rested. Didn't have Embiid, though. Blew a big-time lead to LeBron. I called it a dress rehearsal because I still think teams are auditioning, especially the Sixers, if they are looking to garner his services at the end of the year. I believe you think he's still going to stick around, but what do you think of the audition, if it was one, how it went last night, in terms of presenting themselves as a city and a team to LeBron James?
I think it's kind of a double-edged sword, to be honest with you. And while I think the prospect of LeBron staying is a little more likely than not, I think it's relatively close to 50-50. It's just one of these things where you can't beat something with nothing. And a lot of the scenarios that are put out there have a lot of holes in them. The Philly one, it's a thing where, to be honest with you, you've got his attention at this point. There's no question about that. But I think it's kind of a double-edged sword. He would see that as a place where he can win on the back end of his career, albeit I said to you, the last time I was on that Cleveland and Philly are about the same, all things being considered, if you're a big fancy athlete as far as glamour of cities, and he ain't from Philly, so that takes away the incumbent's advantage. There's a lot sunnier places, as he has gone to in the past, that would love to have him as well. But it's a thing where it was kind of low-key when he came to Cleveland as far as getting a competitive jump up last time around. People really weren't paying as much attention to it, but you look at how old and slow some of the Heat looked around him in the 2014 finals. He squints at Cleveland. He sees Kyrie Irving. He sees the capacity to get Kevin Love to come here. And yet, he didn't get bashed for that. He didn't get bashed in the way that Kevin Durant would 2 summers later for an obvious thing of going to Golden State, jumping on the bandwagon. If LeBron goes to Philly, perception maybe it's a little bit of a beta move. And he's already done that in Miami once. So that's a factor as well. I just got to keep it real with everybody in Philadelphia there.
Oh, well, let me ask you something, Rick, then. Well, I guess two-part question. One, what is on top of his priority list in terms of, is it money, is it rings, is it perception? And two, if you took away Cleveland, of the other teams that have been whispered in, in terms of the cities where he might be interested in, you took away his home base, what other locations, again, it goes back to what's more important to him, a team that maybe is closer to winning a championship, a team that has more veterans, a place where it's more sunny. What would be, I guess, at least like in the pecking order there?
I think they're all closely bunched together. Winning is up there. Legacy is up there. Legacy, of course, some of that is how you win. And again, if you're perceived to be jumping on a bandwagon. So I think Houston is a strong contender. He loves Chris Paul, albeit I think he has seen a little bit this year of the downside of the whole banana boat thing on the back end of the career. Dwayne Wade came here, and it looked great for a while until it didn't, and until Dwayne Wade became one of the people hammering on Kevin Love very unfairly when he was dealing with his issues. So it was a thing where ultimately Wade going back to Miami was both best for him and best for the Cavs. But I think Houston is attractive with Paul, assuming they don't win the title this year. Again, the whole thing about jumping on a bandwagon. If Houston is perceived to still be a little bit away from winning a title, LeBron may see himself as the last piece to do it. He puts them over the top. That doesn't look as much like jumping on a bandwagon. The Lakers look a little bit more plausible than they did, especially the way that some of their players have come on the second half of the year, Ball included. But Ball's old man, I can't help but think that's still going to be an issue down the road here. There's already been a little bit of public back and forth between him and LeBron and saying, keep my kids' names out of your mouth. And that guy just doesn't seem smart enough to stay out of his own way. I mean, if I was Magic Johnson, I'd have the guy basically abducted for like the next 6 months, because then you'd have a much clearer shot at LeBron. But, let me tell you something. Everybody in Cleveland is thrilled every time Lamar Ball opens up his mouth. Let me tell you that.
I love it. Rick Morris on the Comcast Business Hotline. Yeah, I think, and I'm looking at their roster. I mean, Julius Randle, Brandon Ingram, like you mentioned, Lonzo Ball. To me, he's not even one of the. If you're talking about big pieces, I wouldn't even put any of those guys in the big piece genre. But I think the Sixers have a couple big pieces. I think Houston has a couple big pieces. I like Kevin Love at least on that squad. I know they don't have Kyrie anymore or Isaiah. I guess let me ask you this, Rick, because if he leaves Cleveland, there has to be a reason he's going to leave Cleveland. And he likes Cleveland because that's where, he grew up in Akron and whatnot. I mean, he loves the place. So if he leaves, it's for a reason. How can you hide the reason that you're not going somewhere else so you can have a better shot of winning?
Well, that's it. And that's where I think, I've said all along, I think it's the Cavs' game to lose here because, again, if he sees plausibility, and there's two more pieces in different places that we didn't talk about yet. One is L.A. and the prospect of getting Paul George to go with him. Although, again, there is the possibility of duplicative positions there, although I think in fairness, he and Paul George can both play multiple positions. It's not like only one can play at a time necessarily, but also in Cleveland, for as much as this has become a punchline, and it was a punchline before the trading deadline, oh, by the way, the Brooklyn Nets draft pick. In a draft that looks like it's going to be about as loaded as last year's was at the very top. And LeBron, I think I alluded to this the last time I was on, he's already said how much he loves Trae Young. And so, again, now we saw at that didn't work so well with Miami. I think they took it was Shabazz Napier.
Yes, they did.
Help LeBron to stick around.
Yep.
Didn't work there.
No, it did
and,
not.
So the Cavs are going to have to do it on faith. But, hey, what if they end up getting a higher lottery ball and it ends up being Ayton with the number one pick? I don't think that's particularly likely. Nobody here is really hedging their bets on that. But with what the Cavs are going to have in place, it's going to be very, very competitive. What the Sixers have, obviously, is one of the best cores that you could have anywhere. And while I've sort of diminished a little bit on the Sixers' chances of signing and by some of the stuff I said, I'm going to go further counterintuitive and say it's a great move for you guys in the short term. Couldn't be better. But medium and long term, is it the right play? You guys look like you have a core that is going to stay together, health permitting, and win probably more than one championship. For what that would do to it, for what it would do to the development of Ben Simmons, who has a chance to become, if anybody ever could, the next LeBron, and I think that's too big of a mouthful for anybody. But you guys are the only team in the league other than Golden State to where I would say, obviously if he's there, you're going to go for it. But medium and long term, is it the wisest move with what you have? Don't know.
Interesting. All right, Rick Morris on the Comcast Business Hotline. I will say this about that, Rick. I think when there's a window and you could potentially bring in the greatest player arguably on the planet, and long term will come. I get what you're saying, but I think to win championships if they could now while the window's there and while Embiid is healthy, and who knows what happens to his health down the way, and Ben Simmons is having a phenomenal year in year one, I think they certainly would not pass up that chance to do that. I guess what we're thinking is, what is he thinking? And I don't know. We had Chris, I'm spacing on his name, from Sports Illustrated and Yahoo on this week, said LeBron likes chaos. He likes a lot going on and trying to figure things out and trying to move the pieces and try to fit the puzzle and fill things out. Let me ask you this, Rick, because you mentioned the draft pick and the possibility of Cleveland becoming an elite team again. Do you think that, because he only has, I think, about 3 or 4 years left, and wouldn't that take a while to develop a young guy to the point where they are a viable team to go up against, Golden State, the Goliath still in this league?
I look at it the other way. I look at it like he's looking at it like when he's 38 or 39, and I'm just guessing what's inside of his head, as we all are. But a guy who could be at that level by that point, and for as much as Steph Curry is not a beloved figure in this town, when people are looking at someone the likes of Trae Young and saying he could be the same kind of a guy as far as just the ability to hit with that kind of range from anywhere. And by the way, those are the kind of abilities. Obviously, the NBA three is different than the college three, but if you're a shooter, you're a shooter. And Trae Young may not take as long to develop in that way, maybe on the playmaking side of the ball, but George Hill is still going to be here. LeBron is still here as a ball handler. That will come. So that's a thing that I think he's looking at. Another thing is as well, that LeBron has said, and these are the things that don't kind of tend to get reported on nationally as much as they do locally, as far as I think it's his oldest son who is about ready to play for his beloved alma mater, and that how much he's enjoying seeing him play there.
Yeah.
The family's going to stay here as they did in Miami. The last time around when he went to Miami, they stayed here, rather. And, again, he ain't going to see many games of his kid if he's out in L.A. or some other place. And by no means does that mean that he's staying. But that's one more Lincoln log on the decision pile that I think people are not paying enough attention to. I will also say, too, and I say this good-naturedly because of the bond between our cities that we always allude to whenever I'm on, but in hearing the thirst from your callers on this subject about LeBron coming there, I mean, you're a thing where it was easy to root for Philly for a long time. The Eagles won the Super Bowl. Now it's 2 and 3 years for Villanova. I'm just going to say this as a friend. You guys don't want to turn into Boston, okay? You really don't want to have that happen. I'm hearing a little bit of wicked awesome from some of your callers when you're talking about LeBron there.
Wicked awesome. I love. Yeah, I'm trying to keep some semblance of humility around this place. It's like I'm the only one around here. No, let me ask you something, Rick. What's the relationship between Dan Gilbert and LeBron James like? I know it obviously was strained the first time he rolled, but how has that developed or been nurtured since he's been back? And is Dan Gilbert trying to? He sees the writing on the wall. Anything could happen when he's a free agent. Are the Cavs trying to do anything or to try to keep him here to sweeten their deal? Do they talk to him? Do they let him in on decisions? Like, what's the the dynamic there?
It's had its ups and downs, and I will say this, and this is one of these things where, again, I really felt like the first time around the national perception was really kind of screwed up as far as Dan Gilbert being a bad guy, because obviously people focused on the letter from the decision there. But as I said the first time around when LeBron was here, he really had his fingers in the pie, and unlike now, didn't really know what he was doing nearly as much, didn't really have the basketball mind to say this is what we should do, this is what we should do, but he had the leverage then. This time around, David Griffin being the GM and a guy who I just think was an absolute genius at making things happen. He looped LeBron into all this kind of stuff. If LeBron goes, Dan Gilbert's hands are not clean this time around because, again, Kobe Altman's done a good job, all things being considered. And, oh, by the way, for all the folks out there who thought that Boston just absolutely ripped off the Cavs in the Kyrie Irving deal and are now looking at what may remain of his career after that second serious knee injury.
Yep.
You know, Altman did a great job at the trading deadline as well this time around. So you look at it, and again, he's done a good job, and I think LeBron has come to accept him. But LeBron said last year, he basically said on social media what an injustice it was that happened to David Griffin. And Dan Gilbert sort of need to be perceived as the guy who made it all happen here when he had one of the greatest general managers in the league and a guy who just, in an impossible cap situation, time after time, you saw how it kept happening, how he'd make these moves happen and just threading needles to get J.R. Smith here and Mozgov when it came and all these pieces. And again, Altman's done a good job, but Dan Gilbert risked a lot in going with him and going away from Griffin. And we're going to see how that plays out. To me, that's going to be one of the big understated factors of this whole thing. People won't be focusing on nearly as much. If LeBron does go, the roots of it probably started there.
What did happen with David Griffin? I know he was up for a new deal, and he did a lot of great things, and next thing you know, he was out of a job.
I think he got lowballed, quite frankly, and it was a thing where I think Gilbert sort of bristled at a lot of the positive attention he was getting, and it just sort of the Jerry Jones syndrome.
I was just going to say that.
Yeah, or Dan Snyder, and the irony is with Scott McCloughan coming here as a consultant for the Browns, I've always had a lot of regard for Scott McCloughan. And I will tell you this, the minute he left D.C., I was like, they're in trouble. Here we go. It's the Dan Snyder show again. Freudian slip there, I'm afraid. But these rich owners, these gazillionaire owners a lot of times, right? They want to be perceived as the star. And again, Dan Gilbert couldn't get out of his own way on that deal. Like I said, Kobe Altman's done an excellent job, all things considered, under the circumstances. But if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And there was an excellent general manager here who should still be here. And again, if LeBron goes, that may not get talked about much publicly, but that will be a factor out there. There's no question about it. And there's other things as well. I saw a silly thing on social media today that because Dan Gilbert is perceived as being a Trump supporter, that's going to hurt him with LeBron, who most definitely is not. That's extraordinarily overplayed. And by the way, good luck finding a gazillionaire NBA owner who's probably not a Trump supporter. Now, Golden State's owners aren't. You know, in some liberal quarters in the league, you may have some that aren't, but most of the rich guy owners in the league are probably cool with Trump. So that's not going to be a thing where LeBron's going to be able to find an alternative in that way.
Rick Morris on the Comcast Business Hotline. All right. So now we're getting to the roots of the issues here, Rick, and I appreciate it. Now, the team that you guys trotted out last night took on our team in our city and whatnot, and without Embiid, obviously the Sixers ended up winning, and it's been it's a tough stretch this week for Cleveland, but they were getting blown out by 30. It took a Herculean performance by LeBron to get them back into the game. Where are the Cavs in terms of the East right now with the absence of Kyrie and with the resurgence or the surgence of the Sixers right now?
The team to beat. End of story. And again, the last couple of years, I have forecast correctly at the beginning of the playoffs that it would just be a breeze through the East. I'm not saying that this year. I don't think it's going to be any kind of 12-2 scenario going through the East, particularly if they get a draw that is more difficult based on how that game with Philly went, because being the 4 seed versus being the 3 seed may matter in terms of when you might get to play Boston. Although, again, I'm going to caution your city this. There's another team out there, and again, I haven't been a big believer in Boston as the future in the East. I've been saying for a long time,
Toronto.
Philly and Milwaukee.
Okay.
And you may get Milwaukee in the first round. So don't count any kind of chickens whatsoever. Jabari Parker, I believe, is starting his first game tonight. So that's a situation as well. As far as it goes with Embiid versus the Cavs, yeah, there's a little bit of that. They beat him without that. But it's a thing where people were saying last night, well, look at that, Ty Lue. He showed his hand a little more than he would have normally. Yeah, he showed his hand on how to attack a Philly team without Embiid. What you guys did to beat the Cavs is not going to be relevant in the playoffs. You're not going to be able to play that kind of a pace with Embiid. And what the Cavs do to counter the Sixers is not going to be relevant with Embiid in there. So there wasn't really any danger of anybody showing any kind of cards last night, unless for whatever reason Embiid isn't in there when these teams play or goes down again. Not that anybody should be rooting for that on either side. In which case, again, what we saw last night could be relevant. But it's probably going to be Embiid in there. And a lot of the X's and O's, we're going to kind of start from scratch on that. By the way, too, and I don't want to compare this to the loss of Embiid, but the fact that LeBron was essentially the only functional point out there, unless, Clarkson's kind of a combo guard, but no George Hill, no Calderon. This team is actually incredibly lethal with Calderon in the lineup for reasons that the naked eye doesn't seem to pick up on as much, but the advanced statistics show it. And again, this is one of these things where he'll be back quicker than George Hill. And again, a playoff rotation that's going to have Calderon in there is not anything anybody would have forecast. But I will tell you, Joe, and I think this is something that people in Cleveland are starting to believe a little bit in as far as a positive scenario. It'd be hard to top the 2016 season, and particularly the finals, the 3-1, and all of that kind of stuff.
Sure.
This year, oh boy, this year could come close. In terms of all kinds of adversity, whether it be self-inflicted or otherwise, this team has had it and then some. And this is on pace to be the first team in the shot clock era to go through a season undefeated after 3 quarters. If the Cavs are beating you after 3 quarters, you're going to lose. And that's something that everybody's going to have to reckon with in the finals, yes, including whoever comes out of the West.
And I know it would be special because of all the things you mentioned, but they don't have Kyrie like they did a couple years ago. Do you think the horses to replace Kyrie, even if it's in the aggregate?
The aggregate is always one of those things, Joe, because I was thinking about that a little bit earlier. I was like, well, Rodney Hood could step up. And you look at some of these other guys, J.R. Smith's getting a little hotter, and I'm thinking to myself, I hope this isn't echoes of, I hope it's Boobie Gibson's night. Oh, Drew Gooden looks like he showed up to play. So, yeah, it could be a little bit of that. I'm not denying that. But I'll tell you this, though. We've been clamoring for years in this town for a scenario where we would get to see Minnesota Kevin Love. Minnesota Kev is here, baby, as the number 2 option on this team and playing at center. The numbers don't lie. This team is nigh onto unstoppable with Kevin Love at center and with shooters around him. Unstoppable on the offensive end. It might have to be 140 to 135, but good luck stopping the Cavs. That is something that has really worked. They have unlocked him. And again, having Kyrie here as the number 2 option really marginalized Kevin Love in ways that just couldn't be overcome. There was talk late last year, like, oh, this is shades of Minnesota Kevin. No, nothing like what we're seeing now. Nothing at all like that. But you're right. The whole thing, the wild card on all of this is going to be is Larry Nance Jr., who looked really good when he came here.
Yes, he did.
That other gear that he showed, is that for real? Riley Hood, who's the guy I've always believed in, can he step up? Who is going to be the other factor in here, or more than one? If there's more than one, I don't think anybody's stopping the Cavs, but we don't know that there's even going to be one, or it could be a hero of the day kind of a thing, which, again, is fraught with peril.
Rick, I love you, brother. I appreciate everything you brought to the table tonight. Great talking to you, as always. I know you were busy, but I appreciate you taking the time, man. We'll catch up with you soon.
Always an honor, Joe. Thank you for having me on.
All right, Rick. Great stuff, my man. Rick Morris from the FDH Lounge and national show he does right out of Cleveland. We'll get to some of the things he said on the other side. We'll react to some of the things that Rick said. He made some salient points, I think, in terms of some of the things I've been saying, countering some of the things I had said. Because a lot of the things that I'm talking about is speculation. He's a little bit more centered at ground zero, and we'll react to it on the other side. Joe Staszak, 97.5 The Fanatic, coming right back.